morning. I'm Annette Hom.
And I'm Tim Boland.
Welcome to our special Remembrance Day broadcast, Lest We Forget.
We are once again here at the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum in Mount Hope. For the next hour, we will bring you live and uninterrupted coverage of the Remembrance Day ceremony happening here. You'll be hearing from community leaders, members of the Warplane Heritage Museum, and from those who served.
Of course, one of the biggest questions every year at this time is, will the Lancaster be flying today? And this year, the answer is yes. Vera returns for the flyover at 11. The Lancaster flight team for today is comprised of pilot Bill Craig and co-pilot Leon Evans. But the flyover here isn't the end of her mission this Remembrance Day. After flying over the museum, she will honor other ceremonies that take place from Burlington to Brantford to Simcoe to Caledonia.
And then she heads towards Niagara, flying over Grimsby, St. Catharines, before finishing up over Dunnville and Cayuga. Last year, Vera was grounded due to significant repairs that were needed, but the flyover itself was unable to proceed because of the rainy weather.
As for what to expect inside at the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum, this year's keynote speaker at the ceremony is retired Lieutenant General Michael Hood. During his career, he led Canada's Royal Canadian Air Force in many global combat and combat support missions.
In 2015, the Lieutenant General became commander of the RCAF. He is one of the youngest commanders in its history. He retired from the Canadian Armed Forces in 2018.
Many young people will also take part in the ceremony this morning with scouts and guides. Once again, we'll be joined by the Redeemer University Concert Choir, who will sing in Flanders Field. This as veterans, young and old, their families and members from first responders and the general public gather here. When
the ceremony first started, back in 1996, just 70 people were in attendance, but today there is seating for more than 2,000 people. The museum is expecting more guests this year because Remembrance Day does fall on a Saturday. Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum hosts the largest Remembrance Day ceremony outside of the nation's capital in Ottawa.
And everyone at today's ceremony has a special reason for being here and for watching from home. Every year on this day, November 11th, Canadians across the country gather to pause in silence and remember those who have served and continue to serve with the Canadian Armed Forces.
This includes the First and Second World Wars, as well as other times in conflict and on peacekeeping missions.
Today's Master of Ceremonies is David Pridham.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, good morning. Welcome to the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum and our annual service of remembrance. My name is Dave Pridham, and I have the honor to act as your Master of Ceremonies today, along with our chaplain, Reverend Douglas Mitchell, who will lead us in the formal service of remembrance. Thank you all for coming for this special day. It's good to see you all. We're also grateful to have so many veterans and serving members of our Canadian Forces and Emergency Services here today. Before we go any further, I'd just like to remind everyone to please turn off or mute any electronic devices you may be carrying. We are here today to remember, but I think we can all agree, if you get a message in the next hour, we will never forget. We're very lucky here in Canada, and it can be easy to forget that we've faced many difficult times in the past. The men and women of our armed forces faced those challenges for us whenever we needed them to, from the World Wars, Korea, Afghanistan, disaster relief, maritime patrol, peacekeeping missions. They put their bodies and their minds on the line to get the job done, overseas and at home. Our soldiers, sailors, and air crew come from all parts of this country, and in the face of adversity, chaos, and danger, they did their jobs for us. And in the process, many of them gave their lives. They served us together, so today we gather together to remember them. Now, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, please stand if you're able as our veterans bring forward the colors.
Color party, line left, quick, march.
Please remain standing and join us in singing our national anthem led by the Salvation Army Band. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. All right, I'd like to invite the President and CEO of Canadian Warplane Heritage, Mr. Dave Rohrer, to come give some welcoming remarks.
Distinguished guests, cherished veterans, serving members of the Canadian Armed Forces, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, good morning and welcome to the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum. Generations of Canadians have served our country and the free world in times of war, conflict, and peace. Through their duty, their service, and their sacrifice, these men and women have helped us and protected and maintained our freedom and peace that we enjoy today. And they've helped foster that same freedom and peace elsewhere in the world. Each November 11th, at the 11th hour, Canadians pause in a moment of silent remembrance for the men and women who have served and are serving our country. We honor those who have served in the First World War, the Second World War, the Korean War, Afghanistan, on the home front, and in numerous other military assignments elsewhere on the globe. More than 2.3 million Canadians have served in our military, and over 118,000 have fallen in their service to our country. They gave their lives and their future so that we may live in freedom and peace. Historical records tell us about the size and the strength of armed forces, the different military machinery, equipment, and arsenals that were employed, the various military campaigns and battles, the tactics, the strategies, and the outcomes achieved. While this factual information is extremely important and vital, especially to those who are in the profession of arms, one cannot fully appreciate the demands of military service without recognizing the human face of war and armed conflict, the tragic loss of life, the physical hardships, the extreme living conditions, the intense training, demanding operational pressures, and the significant psychological, mental, and spiritual stresses that can affect our sailors, soldiers, and airmen. The first major battle of the Canadians in the First World War occurred at Ypres, Belgium in April 1915. Although the enemy launched over 150 tons of chlorine gas in this battle, killing 1/3 of the Canadian soldiers in 48 hours, the Canadian troops fought hard to hold their position, and in so doing, established themselves as a formidable Allied fighting force. During the Second World War, Canadians again fought valiantly on battlefronts throughout Europe and the world. More than 1 million men and women enlisted in the Navy, Army, and Air Force. On June 6, 1944, 79 years ago, 14,000 Canadian troops landed on Juno Beach and established an Allied beachhead, from which they fought a battle-hardened enemy throughout Northwest Europe, leading to victory in Europe 11 months later. At the same time, millions more at the home front served our country by working in the factories, in the fields, providing materials and manufacturing support for the war effort, as well as food, not only to feed our soldiers, but also to feed the general population of the United Kingdom, where the home front had become the new front line. Yet, the hard-fought victory of World War II did not provide the Canadian military with a long or lasting peace. 5 years later, Canadian soldiers were mobilized yet again in support of the United Nations efforts to defend South Korea from the invasion of communist North Korea. Over 27,000 Canadians served in the Korean War, and on a per capita basis, Canada suffered higher casualties than many of the other nations who partook in that UN mission. Since the end of hostilities in Korea 70 years ago, Canadian soldiers have played an essential role on the world stage of peacekeeping. Operations in Cyprus, the Balkans, Rwanda, Sinai, Mali, and elsewhere added another 1,000 names to the roll of honor of soldiers who have fallen in service to our country. The war in Afghanistan was Canada's longest war, where we joined an international coalition to fight against a terrorist network. More than 40,000 Canadian soldiers served in Afghanistan. 1,800 were wounded and 165 lives were lost. Overall, the Canadian Armed Forces have been tasked with many demanding and operational and training missions and have served everywhere and whenever needed. When we consider all the conflicts fought in far-off lands, peacekeeping missions around the globe, operational and training deployments in Canada and elsewhere, there is much for us to remember. Foremost in our thoughts of remembrance are the people, the men and the women who have served and who are serving our country today. Often placed in very difficult and demanding situations, at great risk to their own personal safety, yet serving with distinction, with honor, bringing honor to themselves, to our country, and to our military. Today, we too often take for granted our way of life, our freedom, our ability to participate in various social and cultural and political events, to be blessed and privileged to live under a freely elected democratic government. But we would do well to remember, especially in light of the current world events, that our Canadian veterans and those serving today realize today that without freedom, there can be no enduring peace. And without peace, there can be no enduring freedom. You may recall the late Professor George Santayana, a philosopher, a poet, a novelist, born in Spain, raised in the United States, graduated from Harvard, and well known for the author of the phrase, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." With this in mind, let us always remember the duty, the service, and sacrifice of all those who have served and are currently serving in our nation's military, as we earnestly seek a time when, in the words of the prophet Micah, swords will be turned into plowshares, spears will be turned into pruning hooks, nation shall not lift up against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Today, it is our duty, it is our privilege to remember and to honor all those who have served and all those who are serving in our nation's military. Thanks to their duty, their service, and their sacrifice, we enjoy a freedom and peace today that might otherwise have been lost to unfettered and unopposed forces of oppression. We will remember them.
As we gather to remember this morning, we hear these words from Scripture. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long." Let us pray. As we come into your presence on this day of remembrance, God, who's known by many names, we find ourselves embroiled in another war in the Middle East, also a continuing war between Russia and Ukraine. We are called to remember the sacrifices made by members of the military, as well as civilians, in these and all wars. Today, we remember the lives of those who died in service of their country, who have local connections to our city. Captain Thomas McQueen, CF-18 fighter crash. Captain Jennifer Casey, Public Affairs Officer of the Snowbirds. Private Mark Anthony Graham, who was killed in Operation Medusa during the NATO mission in Afghanistan. Corporal Nathan Cirillo of the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, who was killed on duty at the National War Memorial. We remember that Remembrance Day began at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918, ending the sacrifices made by our veterans. Today, we especially remember those aging veterans from World War II who are with us as a living reminder of the sacrifices made for our freedom, along with veterans of the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Gulf War, Somalia, Bosnia, the Iraq War, and Afghanistan, as well as many UN peacekeeping missions that have resulted in the loss of life and injuries to the members of the Canadian Armed Forces who were called to serve in various police actions. We also remember the members of 424 City of Hamilton Squadron who have lost their lives performing rescue operations. We also remember the firefighters and the police officers, especially Constable Gregor Piershala and 5 other officers who lost their lives in service to their communities. All these lives lost and numerous lives changed by war, and we are now closer to the peace that we seek. So we ask you, O God, who's known by many names, to remind us that we must strive harder as we seek to bring peace to this world of yours and ours. Help us to remember the principles that our veterans fought and died for, to be vigilant when we see others trying to usurp our freedoms by their language and actions. Remain with us as we leave this time of remembrance and go into the world to continue to tell of the sacrifices that our veterans made and continue to make for our children and grandchildren. Amen.
We now welcome the Redeemer University Choir, led by Dr. Chris Tucson, as they perform their arrangement of In Flanders Fields. In the spring of 1940, A bomber crew from 36 Squadron was killed around the time of Dunkirk's evacuation. One of the men on that crew left behind a letter for his mother that he'd written in case he would be killed. The letter was published anonymously in the London Times on June 18th of 1940, and I'm just going to briefly read a few sections from that letter. It doesn't speak for how all veterans thought, but it faced a mother's grief directly in a very remarkable way. The letter struck a chord with so many people that just a month later, over 500,000 copies had been requested from across the British Commonwealth. Dearest Mother, though I feel no premonition, events are moving rapidly, and I have instructed that this letter be forwarded to you should I fail to return from one of the raids which we're called upon to undertake. You must hope on for a month, but at the end of that time you must accept the fact that I've handed my task over to the extremely capable hands of my comrades of the Royal Air Force, as so many splendid fellows have already done. It will comfort you to know that my role in this war has been of the greatest importance. Our patrols, far out over the North Sea, have helped keep the trade routes clear for our convoys and supply ships, and on one occasion, our information was instrumental in saving the lives of the men in a crippled lighthouse relief ship. Though it will be difficult for you, you will disappoint me if you do not at least try to accept the facts dispassionately, for I shall have done my duty to the utmost of my ability. No man can do more, and no one calling himself a man could do less. I've always admired your amazing courage in the face of continual setbacks. In the way you've given me as good an education and background as anyone in the country, my death would not mean that your struggle has been in vain. Far from it. It means that your sacrifice has been as great as mine. Those who serve England must expect nothing from her. We debase ourselves if we regard our country as merely a place in which to eat or sleep. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand if you're able for the playing of the last post.
They shall not grow old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. We will remember them.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. I welcome Dave Rohrer back to the stage to introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you, David. It is my honor today to introduce our guest speaker, who has come from British Columbia to be with us today, a gentleman who has had a remarkable career serving our country in the Royal Canadian Air Force. When you join the Air Force as a young officer, you hope to be perhaps an aircrew member. If you are, you hope maybe one day to command a squadron, maybe command a flight, then a squadron. And then maybe if you're fortunate and you work hard, you might be able to command a base at some point near the end of your career. Well, this gentleman has blessed our country with his service, having done all those things, served around the world in tactical aviation and C-17 aircraft and large Hercules transport aircraft, has commanded 2 squadrons, 436 Squadron at 8 Wing in Trenton and 429 C-17 Squadron in 8 Wing in Trenton, and then been the wing commander at CFB Trenton and 8 Wing, and then went on in his role as a Lieutenant General, retired to command the Royal Canadian Air Force in his last tour of duty. It is indeed my privilege and pleasure to introduce you to Lieutenant General retired Michael Hood.
Thank you, everyone. I'm so honored to join you here for this most solemn ceremony, and thank you to Dave and the whole museum family for inviting me out to this event. As a student of RCAF history, I'm in awe of what you've built here. Your team, the donors, the city of Hamilton. This is one of a kind in the world, and you do the memory of those who came before us such a great honor. We will remember them. I was very pleased when I saw my brief comments would come following the act of remembrance. I think often of those words and note that it is in fact an act, which implies there's action behind it. The act causes me to think back to my youth in Montreal and the very first Remembrance Day ceremonies that I would attend. Veterans of the First World War were still very well represented, and I was amazed at how straight they stood and how they marched in step like they had never stopped doing it, even though for many it had been 60 years since they last served. I do lament, however, that at that point in my life I had learned very little about either World War. I think it's the great tragedy of our country that education being a provincial responsibility, there's no national curricula for our shared vision of Canada's history and its military commitment. Thank you. I think back to the Remembrance Day of my military service, replete with veterans of the Second World War. All now, there are fewer and fewer. Although 1.1 million Canadians and Newfoundlanders served in uniform both here and around the world, over 45,000 brave women and men in uniform gave their lives. More than 17,000 in the Royal Canadian Air Force. And for those familiar with the Lancaster bomber, almost 10,000 of these casualties were in Bomber Command. Today, less than 20,000 veterans of the Second World War remain, the youngest now in their late 90s. I'm so honored that we have a few with us today. You honor us with your presence, and we thank you for your great service to our country. So I pause and ask myself, what about the remembrance ceremonies of today and tomorrow? And to be honest, I worry somewhat that Canada is not doing enough to ensure that we do indeed remember them. There seems to be less and less action in the act of remembrance. I also worry that our youngest generations and our newest Canadians can truly appreciate the level of sacrifice people have made for this country, that the very fabric of it and the freedom we all enjoy was bought and paid for by successive previous generations that served our country and often died under the maple leaf. If only every city could have a museum as beautiful as this to commemorate that history, I think we'd all be better off in this country. And I lament that we could all be doing a much better job of capturing and celebrating the stories of the present and sacrifice of amazing Canadians. With that thought, I would like to just briefly walk you through a few stories, and I'm going to call this my act of remembrance. Next slide. Well, we've done a great job of recognizing Billy Bishop. He has schools and airports named after him. Next slide. But the man standing next to him in this next slide is the pilot that that Billy Bishop called the greatest pilot who ever lived. His name was William Barker. William Barker was the most decorated soldier, sailor, or airman in the entire Commonwealth, and he remains so to this very day. He was the first president of the Toronto Maple Leafs, and when he died tragically in 1930 in a plane crash, it was the largest funeral in Toronto's history. 50,000 people lined the streets, and the funeral cortege to Mount Pleasant ceremony was 2 miles long. He was laid to rest in his family's tomb and forgotten. How is that possible? The most decorated soldier, sailor, airman in the entire history of our country and the Commonwealth. But it was a fact. We forgot. That's being corrected right now, and the RCAF commander is at Point Pleasant Fuel right now celebrating his life. Next slide. This is Keith Skeet Ogilvie, one of the first to enlist in the Second World War. He was posted to 609 Squadron and flew Spitfires in the Battle of Britain, one of those 100 Canadians that Winston Churchill celebrated. He subsequently became an ace and was credited with shooting down a German Dornier bomber that was on its way to bomb Buckingham Palace, and he was celebrated as the savior of Buckingham Palace. He was shot down in 1941 and sent to Stalag Luft III and helped plan the Great Escape. In fact, he was one of the last to escape out of the tunnel, but was recaptured 2 days later. Of the 76 escapees in the Great Escape, 73 were recaptured and 50 shot to death. He subsequently was freed by the British Army in 1945 and rejoined the peacetime Royal Canadian Air Force and passed on in 1998. Next slide. James Stocky Edwards enlisted in 1940 and arrived in North Africa as a sergeant pilot flying Kitty Hawks. He would shoot down a Messerschmitt on his very first sortie. He became the highest scoring ace in the Western Desert Campaign with a Distinguished Flying Medal and DFC in Bar. He subsequently joined the Italian campaign in Spitfire, and by war end had flown a record 373 combat missions with over 20 kills. He remained in the RCAF and was CO of 430 Squadron, which was the very first Sabre Squadron. He retired in Comox in 1972 and passed away last year. Next slide. These are the Carty brothers, 5 brothers from St. John, New Brunswick, whose father had fought in the First World War. The youngest brother on the right, Gerald, enlisted at 18 years old and became one of the youngest commissioned officers in the Royal Canadian Air Force. He completed 35 combat operations in Wellingtons and Lancasters. All 5 of the brothers survived the war, and today there are still 7 Carty family members serving in the Canadian Armed Forces. Next slide. The Canadair Sabre. Canadair built over 1,800 of these in Canada to provide the Royal Canadian Air Force and 1 Canadian Air Division the backbone of the 14 squadrons that would support the early days of NATO. Next slide. One of my personal heroes, the good-looking guy on the left, is Sid Burrows. Sid was one of those first Sabre pilots flying over in Europe, and he was flying out of Baden-Solingen when he took a hawk through the windscreen of his Sabre. The bird crashed into his face, blinding him, blood pouring down, but he realized if he stuck his head just out enough, the blood would blow away and he could see something out of one of his eyes. So he ripped off his helmet and he saw the Rhine River down below him. And as he's coming into land, his wingman comes on his wing, and Sid lands that plane, goes on to get an Air Force Cross. Lost his flying category because he's blind in one eye. Through perseverance, 10 years later, he got his flying category back and proudly had the call sign Cyclops because he was the only one-eyed pilot in the Royal Canadian Air Force. I speak so well of this because I was in Vancouver just earlier this week where he told that story to a crowd, and he's an amazing man, one of my heroes. So what about newer history? These are the Balkan Rats. If you don't know them, Canada sent 18 F-18s to Aviano Air Base in Italy for the NATO Allied Command over the former Yugoslavia and Kosovo. Canada flew 678 combat sorties with no losses. The RCAF pilots were asked to serve as mission commanders for over half of the missions they flew, and the ground crew ensured a 99.4% serviceability. Next slide. Karen McCrimmon, early pioneer in the Air Force and the first female navigator. She would go on to become the CO of 429 Squadron, the first female CO in any unit in the Canadian Armed Forces. Next slide. What about Canadian leadership in combat in Libya and Iraq and Syria? We were go-to, dependable, capable, and always there. We had a leadership role of the whole campaign in Libya with Canada's Lieutenant General Charlie Bouchard. And in Iraq and Syria, we had 5 different RCF airframes all flying, capabilities all flying in both countries. Next slide. And who's to tell the stories of Afghanistan? I lament that Canada is struggling to get a memorial built some 10 years later. Next slide. I'm going to leave you with about some of the history we're going to write. So the motto of the Royal Canadian Air Force is Sic iter ad astra, such is the pathway to the stars. I'm proud to say that Colonel Jeremy Hansen in this slide will be orbiting the Earth in the next 2 years on the Artemis II mission, writing the next chapter of our history. But it has to be written. Someone has to write it. All of these stories that certainly warm my heart and I've been privileged to share with you need to be captured. We will remember them. So thank you for allowing me to share my act of remembrance with you. And thank you for allowing me the great honor of joining with you today. Thank you so much.
Mike, on behalf of everyone, I'd like to thank you for that stirring speech. I can't remember the last time anyone struck such a chord with the audience, so thank you very much for your remarks. We move on now to the laying of the wreaths. Will the representatives of the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum Board of Directors, Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum volunteers, and Veterans Affairs Canada please come forward and lay your wreaths? Will representatives of the Canadian Armed Forces, Canadian Forces Recruiting Centre, the Canadian Corps of Commissionaires, and the Canada Border Services Agency please come forward and lay your wreaths? Service and Hamilton Fire Service, please come forward and lay your wreaths. Will representatives of UN Peacekeepers 447 Wing, RCAF Association, the Veterans of Norway, and the Royal Canadian Air Cadets 779 Squadron please come forward and lay your wreaths. Will representatives of the Salvation Army, Redeemer University, the Imperial Order Daughters of the Empire, and the 1st Binbrook Scouting Group please come forward and lay your wreaths. Thank you very much. Next, we welcome the Redeemer University Choir to perform their second song for us, Lord, Make Me to Know Thy Ways. Now we'd like to acknowledge the veterans that have joined us today. And I can tell you, veterans, this is not always their favorite part of the program. Obviously, it's nice to be recognized, but sometimes it can feel awkward. You might feel like, maybe I don't deserve it. Sure, I served for a few years, but I mean, really, did I do anything? I understand those feelings, but you did do something by joining and putting your life on the line. We're glad nothing happened, but you did something very meaningful for all of us, and that's why this part is so important to everyone else. This is our chance to recognize you. And we're very fortunate to have some World War II veterans with us today. I'd like to start with Arthur Sullivan. Arthur Sullivan is 97 years old. He was underage when he enlisted. He served in Bomber Command during World War II, and we're very pleased he can be with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, that's Arthur Sullivan on your right. Next, I'd like to recognize Malcolm Andrade. Malcolm is in his late 90s. Malcolm, I forgot to ask you. Malcolm served in fighter command during World War II. He was also underage when he enlisted. So imagine flying a Spitfire when you're just 18 or 19 years old. Ladies and gentlemen, that's Malcolm Andrade. Next, ladies and gentlemen, Walter Decker is with us today. Walter served in the Royal Canadian Navy. He is 99 years old today. Walter climbed the CN Tower last month. That's Walter Decker. And not for the first time. That was his third time climbing the tower. Next, I'd like to recognize Doug Iverson. Doug was a signaller with the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry. He served in the 3rd Division, 4th Light Anti-Aircraft Regiment from 1944 to 45, including Holland, Belgium, and the liberation of Germany. Doug, could you or one of your family members stand so we can recognize you? There he is. Is Arthur Kendall here? I haven't seen you yet. Show of hands? Yeah? No, okay. Edmund Arsenault, ladies and gentlemen, is 101 years old. Yeah, exactly. That's all I had to say about Edmund. We are there. Edmund served with the West Nova Scotia Regiment from 1943 to 45. He fought through most of Italy, but the battles of Ortona, Monte Cassino, and later was in the liberation of Holland as well. So thank you, Edmund. During the war, but we know him from mosquitoes. George Stewart, ladies and gentlemen. And last but not least for individuals, Jack Finan is with us. This is not his first time being here. Jack served in Bomber Command. He flew Lancasters. He's 103 years old, and he'll turn 104 next month. Jack Finan, ladies and gentlemen, if someone could stand to recognize. I've just been told by our president, not only did Jack fly Lancasters, he flew our Lancaster, VRA. Now, I lied to you. There's one more. I'm keeping track this year. Sylvia Morgan, ladies and gentlemen, was a nurse with the Royal Air Force. She served in Middlesex Hospital during the Blitz. And served the RAF for years afterwards. Sylvia Morgan is 99 years old. Sylvia, could you or your family stand so we can recognize you? There she is. Thank you very much. If there are any other World War II veterans here that I haven't named, if you'd like to be recognized, please stand now and we will show our appreciation. We have a gentleman right here, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, I'm going to recognize everyone else in one group here. So, any other veterans that are present today, veterans of Korea, United Nations peacekeeping missions, anyone who served NORAD or NATO, members of the Canadian Forces, regular or reserve, including veterans of operations in the Persian Gulf, Afghanistan or Iraq, members of the RAF Regiment, and anyone who served Allied forces, especially under the Crown. Please stand if you're able so we can recognize you.
God Save the King. God Save the King. As we leave this time of remembrance, let us go into the world to spread the message of love and peace to all those we meet. Amen. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, as you are able, please stand as we sing God Save the King.
Please be seated. I promise we are this close to being done. Before we finish, I'd like to thank several important groups of people. Firstly, thank you to this Meadowlands Salvation Army Band for a wonderful performance today. I'd also like to thank the Redeemer University Choir for a beautiful performance. And I'd just like to add, this is the last year that we'll see Chris Tucson conducting. He'll be retiring soon from a long and distinguished teaching career, and I believe 26 years you've been doing this, Chris? Here? Yep, 26 years. Can we have a round of applause for Chris Tucson for conducting? Thank you, Pipe Major Gord Black from the Paris Port Dover Pipe Band. I'd especially like to thank all the staff and volunteers who work very hard to put this show on every year. They've done another great job. Thank you for all your hard work. And finally, I'd like to thank all of you for coming out today. It was wonderful to see so many people here. You're even sticking with it right to the end when I don't stop talking. So thank you. After we retire the colors, we will play a video on the screens. You're welcome to stay and enjoy it with us if you like. It's called God Bless You, Canada. If you're not sure what to do with your poppy once this is over, you are welcome to come lay it on the cenotaph to your right. There's also a beautiful display at the back where you can lay it on several tables there. There's numerous poppies where you can put it. Thank you all. Please stand as you are able for the retiring of the colors.
Color party, one step forward, march. Color party, move to the right, right, turn. Color party, by the left, quick, march.
Ask for a hand of applause for our MC, David Pridham. David had the unenviable task of replacing Bill McBride, who was very polished at this type of MC job. And David has done a wonderful job. He is also a veteran of our tour in Afghanistan, of our mission in Afghanistan. So thank you, David.
Thank you all. Please be seated. We do have a video. If you'd like to leave, I understand. God Bless You, Canada will play now. President is on it. If you'd like to get up and stretch your legs, by all means, it's been over an hour. If you'd like to stick around, we're seeing if that video will play. Once again, thanks for joining us, and I hope I don't have to say anything else to you.